Sorry, I lost the mouse, which I seem to only do on Sunday nights for some reason. So I don't know about you. Some people are really happy this time of year, and they like the hubbub is the word coming to mind, if that is the way that you think. Some people don't like it. It's stressful. Everybody is in a bad mood, and they're rushing. But our culture intentionally ups the pressures at the end of the year to think about ourselves, to think about our plans, and then shamelessly shoves materialism in our face. It starts back with, Black Friday, and I think of just the pressure that I feel of, if I don't buy this thing, then something's going to be wrong, and that's exactly what they're trying for. But even this time of year, if it's supposed to be for others, we're still told you need to buy gifts. You need to get everybody a gift. Make sure you don't forget this person on your list, so on and so forth. And this is not about gift giving per se or anything to that nature, but that pressure of doing these things and of sticking to our plans and thinking about ourselves, as children of God, we should be able to see through this and to realize what it is, and then to offer an example to those around us of a different way. That we don't have to put all of our stock into celebrations and experiences and presents. And I don't know why, but I find myself thinking about doing charitable works more during the holiday season than others. And part of that is probably the environment. I think probably it's because even if the ends are just materialistic with what's going on in the culture, at least on the surface, our culture is saying it's a time of gratitude and charitable acts during the holiday seasons. So maybe that's why I think about it. But tonight I want to talk about a well-known passage and reflect on it and take some applications about this idea of doing good, grateful things for other people. And so turn to Matthew chapter 25, that Stan read for us, or Eric read for us a little bit ago. So in Matthew chapter 25, in this context of a couple chapters, Jesus is repeatedly and intentionally calling for his disciples to be prepared for the judgment. And so he tells us to be ready for his coming, to be alert, to be watchful. And he tells this parable of the 10 virgins in chapter 25, where in all of this, they're supposed to be prepared for the appearance of the bridegroom. So there's this idea of be ready, be prepared, don't fall asleep on the job, all of those things. And in the middle of Matthew 25, we have what's maybe a little bit more well-known, the parable of the talents. And so in that parable, Jesus begins to say how his servants should be living in the meantime. So the virgins are waiting for something to happen, and they're supposed to be prepared. And the talent says, okay, what actions, what sort of things are we supposed to be busy with while we're waiting? He tells the parable of the talents and the importance of using what the master has given us in a way that honors him. And then beginning in Matthew 25 and verse 31, he talks about the coming of the Son of Man and is sitting on the throne to judge. And the judge, the king, which I believe is Jesus, separates the righteous from the unrighteous. And so this is part of what was read for us. But if we start in verse 31, it says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, and then he will sit on his glorious throne, and before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people from one another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And then that's where what Eric read for us comes in, where he separates them, one's on the right and one's on the left, and he says to those on his right, come, you are blessed because you have done these things. And so I want to take some time to think about this and realize that what we're talking about is the kinds of works that we need to be engaged in while we're waiting. This is a lot of what Matthew 25 is talking about. What are we supposed to be busy with while we're waiting? And so we'll see this idea of compassion and of mercy. So let's go back to what is said to these people in verse 33. And so he'll place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. And then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." And then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me." Then they also will answer, saying, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, and did not minister to you?" Then he will answer them, saying, "Truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. And these will go away into punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." And so we have these two groups of people that are being spoken to by the king, by the master. And in both cases, those being addressed say, "Well, when did we do that? When had we performed these actions?" And Jesus points to what they had been doing under his lordship. You know, the king had been away apparently. He comes and now he's taking accounts from all of his servants. And he identifies himself with those who needed help. He says, "When you did that to them, it was like you were doing it to me." And that's a really big concept too, that the king is identifying himself with those in need. I was the stranger, and I was the naked, and I was the hungry. And that's something that we could talk about on its own. But if we're not paying close attention, we can miss something I think that's really important. And it's about what Matthew is doing here in chapter 25. If we're not paying close attention, we can miss that all of what chapter 25 seems to be concerned with is what the servants of the master are doing while they're waiting for his return. And so you put the parable of the virgins and the talents and this description of what's going on here at the judgment. This is really, I would say, what the parable of the talents is about. Okay, how did you use what I gave you? And this is another way to say it. That this is discussing the judgments of the king and how they use those things that were given, just like in the parable of the talents. What have you been doing since I've been gone? So more specifically, I think when you look at this together, Matthew is communicating that what Jesus has in mind in talking about this, the parable of the talents, and there it's using the gifts and the resources and the abilities that the master has given us. And here, the talents, this is doing the works he mentions in the judgments of the sheep and the goats. So we always talk about, okay, what exactly is the parable of the talents about? And we talk about what's things that God has given us. And according to Matthew, in putting these two things together, he's saying specifically it is to use what he has given you in a way that honors him by helping other people. I think that's what Matthew is pointing us to here. Matthew's pointing out to us in Jesus' teaching that being a faithful slave, whether it's in the parable of the talents or it's here before the throne of the king, being a faithful slave and using what the master has given us while he's away involves feeding and welcoming and clothing and visiting. And I think that's why he puts these two together like this. And so while during this time of year, a lot of us in our culture, and maybe ourselves, give lip service to the idea of serving those who don't have, how many of us do it? So I want to reflect tonight on these acts that Jesus says his faithful servants will do in his name. These things that he says you need to be busy with, filling your time and doing this while you're waiting for me. And so we see very explicitly that the blessed servants in this passage are those that are feeding and welcoming and clothing and visiting others in King Jesus' name. And so we just look back at this a little bit. And we've read this already, and you can start to think, okay, what is the connection between these works that they're doing and their inheritance? Because it can convey the idea that they're earning their way into this kingdom as a result of the works that they've done, and that's not the case. It is, what have you done in my name? What have you done for me? How have you served me? Because they're apparently in the kingdom. But if you haven't served me, if you haven't honored me, then you're not worthy of what I'm going to give you. To say that another way, they're not earning their way into this. This is talking about, have they been faithful? Have they demonstrated that they are under the lordship of this king? And so the subjects were displaying acts of mercy, and they were taking care of others in the Lord's name, in the king's name. And it's been helpfully summarized, I think, by someone as taking care of basic human needs. So one way to summarize these is the basic human needs of food, clothing and shelter, and companionship. And I think that works pretty well to help it stick in our minds. So this is what he says. You're taking care of people and what they need. If they don't have food, if they don't have something to drink, you give it to them. If they don't have clothing, you give it to them. If they're in a dire circumstance, you visit them and you help them. We take care of people's needs. And as we said, Jesus, as the king, surprisingly identifies himself with those in need. He says, if you're doing it to them, then you're doing it to me. And so he puts himself right there next to them. But he also says, you're serving me when you're doing this. You're doing it in my name. You should be doing it as if you were doing it to me, even though I wasn't there. And I want to say something specifically. If you look at the specific language that Jesus uses in this passage, Jesus is thinking first of the disciples in the family of heaven as the recipients of these charitable works. So he specifies, if we look at verse 40, and the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers. So the brothers and sisters of Christ. And we would usually say that those are the disciples in the kingdom. But before we say that that excuses us from other things, we have to look at the bigger picture, right? Because we know that there are other passages that Jesus does not limit works of compassion just to the brothers and sisters in the kingdom. For example, the Good Samaritan, where he says, who's my neighbor? It's whoever you have the opportunity to help, is the answer in parentheses with that story. The main point here is that we have to help each other in the kingdom this way, but it's not limited to that, is what I want us to understand. It is not limited to just helping disciples. Obviously, the spirit of the text, or what is being communicated here, is that we need to be busy with works of compassion while the king is away. And so we see that the blessed are those who feed and welcome and clothe and visit, and that they're doing this to the kingdom servants, but of course I think they're also doing it to others as well. And that the condemnation comes to those who refuse to take care of other people. And so if you look at the goats, those on the left, and what they say and what the response is, for those who refuse to do works of mercy, there is condemnation. You know, how, if you take a step back, how are they going to claim that they belong to this king who identifies with his needy brothers and sisters if they are not willing to take care of them? They're not doing the king's business. They're not performing his will. If you look at what they say, another way to say what they said, maybe in different language, is they can say, we did not refuse you. We didn't do anything wrong. I never had the opportunity to feed you or to clothe you. You know, I did not do anything wrong here. And another way to say what the king says is, but you didn't do what you should have done either. So they said, we didn't do anything wrong here, but he said, but you also didn't do the right thing. And so we can often get preoccupied with, well, I didn't do anything wrong. And we talk about that as sins of commission, things that I commit. But what we're pointing toward here is also that there are those sins of omission, where we don't do the things that we have the opportunity and responsibility to do. And so they defend themselves and say, we never had any opportunity to take care of you. We didn't do anything wrong in refusing you. He said, but you didn't do it when you had opportunity for others. You omitted to do the right thing. And so that's what they're told in response to all of this, is that they're condemned for their lack of willingness to work these things of compassion in the name of the king. And so, as we said, absolutely the precedent here is that at least we need to be merciful in taking care of God's family. If one of us needs something, then they should not need it pretty soon after that. If we fail that, then we have missed the boat, really. So we understand that absolutely the precedent is that we should be merciful in taking care of God's family in need. But as we said, the push of the text, the spirit of the text here further seems to also just be working compassion in general. And we see the things that he talks about here. You gave me food and drink. You welcomed me. You clothed me. You visited me and came to me. Would any of us say that it is wrong or that we're not somehow obligated to do these things toward people outside of the church? I don't think any of us in good conscience would say that, and that's because we realize the spirit of what Jesus is saying. It would be, I think we would get some looks from him at least if we said, well, but you didn't say that I have to do this for other people, right? The spirit of what Jesus is saying is that we need to be busy with these things of feeding and welcoming and clothing and visiting, that this is what his subjects need to be doing. And another thing about that this is not for the subjects to assign somebody else to do it. This isn't for the subjects to just pool their resources so that they can shove it off on someone else to take care of the problem. It's their responsibility. And so that's a big thing. God doesn't want us farming this off on some institution or somebody else. He wants us to be busy with doing this for people. So how can we be busy doing these things? Because as we said, what Matthew is pointing us toward is that while we are waiting for the return of the king, the master, what we are supposed to be doing is using what we have in a way that honors him, and what he has in mind about that is by acts of mercy, acts of righteousness. So how can we be doing these things? I'm just going to give some ideas, but of course you can think of other ones on your own as well. But one of the things I think, as we talked about in the introduction, is we can get so wrapped up in this idea of buying presents for everyone, right? I know with the trek that we're about to make to see all the extended family, Salem and I have a shared notes list of the parents and the aunts and uncles and all this. And we got to make sure that we get a check mark next to their name, or else they're going to complain that we didn't bring them a present. And we can get too wrapped up into that. And so I'm not saying don't buy your mom a gift, but how about setting aside money to do something good with instead of getting yourself something? Maybe instead of your spouse and you agree, instead of using this for us, let's use this for someone else. And so there could be charities, there could be something that you decide to go do with that. So maybe setting aside money to donate instead of contributing to all the materialism that our culture is pushing on us, and take the time to supply for someone else when we have excess. I think that's a biblical principle. Another idea might just be to volunteer or to spend time with those that maybe struggle around holidays and celebrations. because it's not happy and cheery for everyone. There are, I know, people in our number who don't like holidays, who don't have warm and fuzzy feelings about these things. There are also people that, while everyone else is eating with their family and having a good time, they're sitting alone. And they don't have those opportunities. So volunteer or spend time with those who maybe don't have what we have. And I can think of Love Chapel, I think, is a great organization to do that. That's an example that pops into my head. Or any other number of things that we have in the back of our booklet. Maybe just inviting others to be part of your celebrations. You know, hey, they don't have anything going on with their family. They're not spending time with them. Why don't you come with us? Or maybe we know people who are sick or are in prison, and we visit them. Right? And I've heard it said, for the most part, and this can be overgeneralized, but that we all either have time or money. We all either have an excess of time or we have an excess of money. And that might be an overgeneralization, but to keep things simple, I think that's a helpful way to think about it. You know, maybe I don't have any extra money, but I do have some free weekends where I can go do something. Or I can sacrifice a night of TV to do an act of mercy for someone else. Or maybe I don't have time because maybe I have little kids or something like that, but I do have a little bit of extra that I can use to benefit someone else. And so think about or maybe you have both, right? Maybe you have both. And you can use both of those. But think about what it is that you can do. What can we do? And I'll be totally transparent about this, right? Because it could be easy for me to come up here and say, you guys need to do all this stuff and make sure that you're getting it done. But I'm pretty good at thinking about doing these things. And Salem will tell you every so often I'll come to her with an idea of, you know what, we should do this really good thing. Or we should set this chunk of money aside so that we can give it to this. And then ask her how many times I follow through with that. I'm pretty terrible about following through, but I'm pretty good at ideas. The follow through is really the important part, I think. Because we can think and we can say, yeah, I want to do that. I have the feelings to do that. But the reason that I don't follow through is because I get wrapped up in my own world and in my own plans. I think that would be really good if I could do that for someone. It would be good if we could help this person in this way, and then you know what? I get back to my business and my problems and my plans and my expectations, and I forget about it. So I'm not saying that you guys need to do all this stuff because I do it. I'm saying that this is what the Lord tells us. And these times of years when we're having these feelings and thinking these things is a really good way to have some of that extra energy to kind of get these jump started. And then we can come up with all kinds of excuses as to why we can't do something. Maybe it's a suspicion of, if I help that person, they're just going to use it for drugs. Or, maybe someone is going to teach them something false. Or I'm just too busy. Or, I gotta save for this thing, and so I don't have anything extra. And I can't tell you whether all of those are real excuses or not, but I want you to prayerfully ask, what is behind the excuse? What is the real reason? Are we just resisting? Are we not wanting to be uncomfortable? Are we not wanting to give things up? Because resisting and not wanting to be uncomfortable and not wanting to give things up are not exactly characteristics of people in the kingdom of heaven. We have to ask ourselves, what is really behind the excuse? If I'm saying something, and maybe it helps to talk it out with someone else, is there anything really behind this, or am I just fooling myself? But we can see when taken together, the teachings of Jesus in Matthew here are pointing us to help us see that we are to be busy while we're waiting for the King in righteousness and in works of mercy. or compassion. That we're supposed to be doing these things in His name, helping people and giving to those in need. All of these are actions of love that we can take out of love for Him. So we wonder, what do we busy ourselves with? We're prepared and we're ready for Him to come back. And the parable of the talents, we need to make sure that we're using our talents. But what exactly does that mean? Matthew says it means honoring Him with what we have and helping those who don't, at least in this context. So for all of us believers, for those who are in the kingdom, and for all of us who have things that we know others don't have, and we could go down the list. Even the poorest in this country are still worlds better off than others in other countries. That's the reality. We are very fortunate. And sometimes we get so wrapped up that we lose track of how fortunate we are. And we forget how complicated and messy and unnecessary a lot of things are in our lives because we lose perspective. But think about some of our brothers and sisters who, for example, last year or maybe earlier this year in Zimbabwe had a famine where for months they did not know where their food was coming from. Have any of us ever had that? Maybe there's been a couple, but I doubt that most of us have ever felt something like that. So the call to action here for us is to take some time, to take some money, to take some prayer that you would otherwise dedicate to yourself and dedicate it to helping someone else in the name of Christ. Because that's what He says that He wants us to do. To be doing things for Him, to be honoring Him. Of course, just as a service to Him, but then also that opens doors, that opens opportunities for things, that displays some of the physical manifestations of what it is that Christ came to do. He came to do a lot more than just heal and to feed. He came to heal people spiritually, to feed them spiritually. And a lot of these things that He asks us to do point to that reality. Help us to be involved in it. So I thank you for listening, and I ask that you consider what it is that you can do. Think about what it is, and then follow through with it. And you can ask me what it is that I decided and if I followed through. And maybe I'll ask you. And it will help if you find someone that you can be accountable to, because as I said, it's easy to come up with ideas. It's another thing to actually do them. But the actions of love are where it's important. So disciples, let's be busy in doing those things. And if you are someone who wants to be part of the King's kingdom, who wants to be ready for when He appears, to be able to meet Him and to hear those words of the blessed servants that we read here, we can help you to do that. We can show you what it is that the King has asked you and how you need to respond. And we can do that tonight. We can do it tomorrow. Whenever you need, just let us know as we stand and sing.